found it.
Now don't forget where you put it.
Welcome to The Lisa Show.
Has grieving got you in a rut you can't escape? Well, coming up in 20 minutes, we're going to learn how we can break free. It can be hard to persuade something, or someone that you care about without showing just a little passion, right? Mm-hmm. And especially if it's something that you feel very strongly about. But sometimes that passion, or I like to call it love oozing from every pore, it can come off as aggression and force. But persuasion can be a really positive thing when it's done the right way. It is kind of a lost art form, I think. But what does it really look like? And how can we learn to use persuasion when it is appropriate? Well, today we're inviting into this conversation friend of the show, Emily Taylor, about the 6 principles of persuasion. She's a certified mediator, conflict coach, and a Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution. She's got a lot of exciting research to share with us about what this really looks like in real-world situations. Thanks for being here, Emily.
Sure, my pleasure.
Okay, so when we're talking about persuasion, what's the difference between negotiation and persuasion?
Sure. Negotiation is a lot more direct. We're trying to maybe not all at once let the other person know what we want, but we're going to quickly try to get through a conflict and try to sort it out.
Okay.
And it's overt. It's openly like, hey, I'd really like to buy that couch. Mm-hmm. And then, it's like you're hammering over a price on, a Facebook sale.
Sure.
But persuasion is much slower and more subtle. So we're trying to change what someone thinks, believes, or does, but usually over time and through methods that are not so direct.
Okay.
So someone might not even know that we're trying to persuade them, but negotiation would be a lot more direct and more quick to try to come up with a resolution.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you very directly. How do I persuade others to think or believe or
I'm not going to do it, whatever
what
it
I
is.
want them to do?
Sure. Okay, so I think a lot of us come in thinking that if we just lay out our arguments and use logic and we're reasonable, that other people will be persuaded. If you go onto Facebook, Twitter, all over social media, people are trying to lay out arguments, not always lay out arguments. They're trying, there's accusations and blame and all that stuff too. But they figure, okay, you'll come to my side when I show you how dumb your arguments are or how effective my arguments are. But that's actually not usually how it works. So there was a guy named Robert Cialdini. He was a professor at Arizona State University, and he was curious why when salespeople would come to his home, he would end up with these items that he didn't really want, that somehow he had bought them. And it reminded me during one of my first years of college, just learning how to use my own money, cook for myself. There was we called him the perfume guy. The perfume guy came around with this little satchel of all these knockoff perfumes that probably really cost $5 to make. Maybe.
Uh-huh.
And he came in. He was super engaging. He was not creepy. He was asking us questions. And me, I had hardly any money. In the end, I'm left. I bought a thing of perfume from this guy, and I was like, why did I just spend $20 on perfume when I need it for groceries? But he was so engaging. It kind of made me. I had the same question about how did I just do this thing and say yes in a situation where normally I don't think I would have if I'd just gone into a department store. So he was very likable. So there's these 6 principles that Dr. Cialdini, and I've studied this too. I'll lay out what they are, and then we can go through some examples. But reciprocity is one. That's where someone does something for you first, and then you feel obligated to do something for them.
Okay.
They bring you cookies to your door, and you're like, oh, I really should say thank you or do something nice for them. The second one would be commitment and consistency. So I said I would vote, and I, signed this little form, so I'm much more likely to do it because I said I was going to do it.
Well, those are the reading logs that you get at school.
Yeah.
for your
Or,
kids.
like,
Ugh, hated those things, but commitment and consistency made me do it.
yeah, or I don't know if you've ever been to the dentist, and some offices have taken this on where instead of, they don't write out the little like next appointment card for you. They actually have you write it. And they've done research, and it shows people will be more likely to keep their appointment if they actually write themselves the card. Interesting. So that's commitment and consistency. And then social proof is everybody, you go into a stadium and then everybody starts standing up. What are you most likely to do?
Stand up.
I'm the guy who sits down,
Okay, and
Emily.
says, "Everybody sit down, I can't see."
Yeah, would you guys mind?
He's a grumpy old man.
But I think
Anyway,
most
in
people
that
stand.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you're afraid or uncertain, you're likely to follow social cues from other people. That's called social proof or consensus. We're like herd animals at times, and that's kind of when it comes out. And then say I come in, someday when we do this interview, I'll come in with like a lab coat or like a really fancy suit and like my briefcase.
Oh, yeah.
That's pushing authority. Like I'm an expert because I have the get up or the uniform or I have the credentials. Like if they've shown that patients will more likely follow doctors' orders if the doctors have their diplomas framed on the wall while they're talking with a patient. That's authority. Have you? I don't know if you've ever noticed that.
Interesting. I'm going to have to like print out all of my degrees. Okay, the one, and put it on the wall in my room, and every room in my house.
No, put it on the wall of the studio. So then anytime I go, what are you doing, Lisa?
Look over there, buddy.
You see that? That is a bachelor's.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, so what's tricky right now, I don't know, again, not to get into politics, but is when there's, formerly it was kind of like the whole government, but then it's kind of like split off. So there's different authorities, or say there's different news authorities, but in the past it was maybe more centralized.
Sure.
So you have people still looking to an authority, but there may be multiple sources. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So we're watching some of that happen where people are invoking different sources of authority.
We're talking with Emily Taylor, and if I'm doing my numbering correctly, as we've been talking about the principles of persuasion, we are about to hit up number 5. We've mentioned number 1, reciprocity, 2, commitment and consistency, 3, social proof or consensus, and 4, pushing authority. So what's number 5?
Scarcity.
Ooh.
So think toilet paper.
Yep.
There was enough toilet paper in the United States, but it wasn't all in the right place at the right time. So when people believe there's not enough of something to go around, they want more of it. It's just a general kind of like supply and demand.
Well, we just saw it again with gas, and people are putting gas in plastic buckets.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it kind of like you could be mixing principles too, like say, I see a lot of people going to the gas station all of a sudden, and they're filling up Ziploc bags with gas. I'm like, should I be doing that?
Yeah.
Is this necessary? So, again, scarcity, it's kind of like an evolved desire to make sure we don't miss out. But if there's a perceived lack of something, it may be a real lack or it may just be a perception, we tend to want to act and try to make sure we don't miss out. Kind of FOMO, that kind of thing. And then the last one, which I think you guys do a good job with persuading through liking. So we tend to say yes to the people we like. And there's a few things that make us more likely to like someone. And we tend to like people who are similar to us, and that can be in a variety of different ways. Say, I like to go hiking, so if I'm with other hikers, maybe I'm more likely to say yes to something they ask me. We like people who pay us compliments, and we also like people who cooperate with us towards mutual goals. So those are the 6 principles, and there's a ton we could talk about in different ways. But does anything stand out to you, or do you have questions?
Well,
about
yeah. So we're the big picture here is that We want to know how other people are trying to persuade us, probably just as much as we want to know how to persuade others as well. So I'm wondering, just as an overall principle, how we use these just in a regular everyday life and the difference that it might make and just knowing it.
Sure. So the first thing, like you said, is know that these principles are being used on you by mass media, marketing, all your consumer behavior constantly.
Okay.
These principles are known by all the people in business school.
Right.
Huge companies are using them. So
we should know them too.
Yes. So an example of how I actually had, interestingly, this was several years ago, I had a whole class just on persuasion. Instead of having to write papers about the principles of persuasion, I had to go use them in my real life. That's how I was graded. So we had a really stingy HOA in Colorado where I lived, and we had a house that looked like it was a Mexican style house. It needed a red tile roof. Okay. It was begging for one. Mm-hmm. But it was contrary to the general colors that were allowed in our HOA. And my neighbor happened to be the architectural director for the HOA. He was the guy that was going to say yay or nay.
Okay.
So I was trying to figure out how I could persuade him.
Okay.
I got 5 different panels, different colors of roofs. My neighbor had just put a roof on that was way too bright, and it was actually a big conflict in the neighborhood about the color of her roof. So one of the colors that I chose was the color that she had, and I laid out the samples on my driveway. Mm-hmm. I had been getting to know my neighbor, talking with him regularly, hoping that he liked me enough.
Okay.
But then I laid out the tiles, and when he first arrived, I could see that he was looking at the tile roof that was just like my neighbor's. That was the real problem.
Yeah.
And I kind of motioned to that tile, and he said, oh, I could tell in his eyes, he was like, oh, this can't be it. And I said, this is way too bright, isn't it? And he said, oh, yeah. And then he himself looked through the other colors, and I had laid them out in a way that he eventually was like, well, that one's okay. And I said, I know, that's the one we want. Don't you think that will look really good? And what was cool about it was I didn't feel conniving, but but it was planned. Like I laid out things in a way that it was contrasting so he could make his own decision based on having full information. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
and you wore your white lab coat. Wait, no.
Well, he was the guy in the coat, right?
Right.
I actually didn't have authority. And I think a lot of times we think when we don't have a title or a position of power that we can't really persuade people, but it's actually not true. Like in that case, he was the authority, but I could use other principles such as liking or have the contrast of those different options, and then he could choose for himself. So that was that was empowering to me because I was like, oh, I didn't realize that I had the power to influence and allow him to make a decision on his own at the same time.
Did you get the red roof?
That makes sense. I did, and it looks so good.
I bet it does.
But it wasn't the McDonald's clown red, but it was it looked good, and people commented on it.
Emily, what I'm realizing is, when we started the show this morning and we didn't know that you were going to be on the show, and then, just sort of your obscure message like, hey, guys, what's going on? We were being persuaded.
Wait a second. We like her.
And we didn't even know it the whole time. If people want to learn more about persuasion, is this a skill that you feel like with these principles that you've shared that we can learn and actually be able to apply?
For sure. The first thing is to just identify what they are, and then you pick a certain situation where you're like, this is just not working well for me. I'm trying to force it, or I'm trying to manipulate, or I'm trying to reward. Say, even with kids, or if you're a teacher, we go through this whole list, or I'm going to withhold affection, or I'm going to be really nice. but there's more to it. So you definitely can learn these things. I feel like over time I've identified things that work better. If I want someone to do something, I will say, hey, will you do it? And if they commit verbally, I'm like, okay, that's a good sign. But if I can get them to commit even in writing, I'm much more likely to get them to follow through with something.
Wow.
And it's not because I'm ethically using it. I'm not trying to manipulate.
Sure.
There's a fine line. But if it's something I'm persuading someone to do something good and to their benefit, I guess I'm all in.
I love it.
And you mentioned some of this is what you've come to learn about it, but you also mentioned another study, and I just want to give that as a reference point again.
Yeah, so even if you just YouTube 6 Principles of Persuasion, there are a couple really good videos that are done by, it's called Influence at Work, that his organization has created. And they just go through kind of in a cartoon form like doodling, to explain how these work. The real trick, though, is to take them from kind of the business case idea into your normal life, because most of it has been framed for businesses, but the principles work in any kind of relationship.
And this is where Emily Taylor comes into view, helping us to make sense about how this can help improve our relationships with our family.
Yes, definitely.
Emily Taylor, a certified mediator, conflict coach, and the assistant director of BYU's Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution. You got a book coming out, and we're looking forward to being able to talk to you more about that. That book is called Conflict Fluent, Mastering the 5 Conflict Approaches. People can find Emily online at conflictfluent.com or at raisingmediators.com. Emily, thanks for being back on the show.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Coming up in 5 minutes, we're going to be looking at grief from a different perspective and learning how to help our loved ones go through it. Thank you for listening to The Lisa Show. Thanks for listening to The Lisa Show. Find yourself in screaming matches with your kids? In 20 minutes, join us as we learn 3 steps to help you stop yelling at your kids. But first, it's time for your morning buzz.
That's right. It's 3 things that are trending online right now, things that folks are talking about. Should there be water cooler ever again in the future? This is what people would be talking about. First of all, everyone over on YouTube talking about Venom, Let There Be Carnage. Comes out later this fall. Here's why I'm excited about it, because Michelle Williams, who people will remember from Dawson's Creek, of course, as well as Naomi Harris and Woody Harrelson in the role of the villain, Cletus Cassidy, Carnage, Woody Harrelson going to be in a superhero movie. That's what I don't know why I'm yelling about it necessarily, but I'm pretty excited about that. Also, trending online right now is Rihanna, the now billionaire Rihanna. And I know what you're thinking. Sure, her music is great. Certainly. I like a good Rihanna song every now and then. But billionaire? I had no idea. Well, it's because she is a 50% owner of Fenty Beauty. That's where most of her riches come from. Her music's great, but she's an owner of Fenty Beauty. I had no idea. Way to go, billionaire Rihanna. Finally, today is Work Like a Dog Day. It honors and recognizes those who work the very hardest out of anyone. Today to show appreciation for these hard workers and to follow their lead. Those who work like dogs, put in that extra effort. They don't stop until a task is finished and don't sit idle while there is work to be done. And that is your Morning Buzz. Grief is complex. There are so many struggles and challenges that each of us face each day, and sometimes they can build up to be what seems like unbearable, sending us into a spiral of grief and doubt like a whirlpool or like a storm. But even the harshest storms, we can learn to bear and also find our way through. But how? How do we learn to navigate the storms of grief? And how can we learn to help others who are also struggling to do the same? Well, we're excited to have on with us friend of the show, Gaynalyn Condy, to help us navigate grief. Welcome, Gaynalyn.
It's so good to be with you, Richie.
You know, one of the things that I love about you is when I say, would you define for me, and it can be any number of things, you break it down in a way that I feel like is really understandable. So grief, what's the difference between grief and just being like, I thought that would go a different way, and it really didn't end up that way?
Well, I would say that grief is a mixed bag. And I do think that we get in trouble if we're grieving. And I think one part of the question that I want to include is that grief doesn't just connect with the loss of a loved one. It obviously does there. But I think there was grief last year during the pandemic for loss of other types of situations or jobs or freedoms or connection. So I think, first of all, grief is a mix of a lot of different emotions, and we get in trouble when we want it to look a certain way, and then we're surprised because, say, we're grieving the death of someone that we love, it shows up as anxiety, or it shows up as frustration, or it shows up as fear. We're not immediately thinking, oh, I'm grieving, right? We think that grief should look like I'm crying and I'm sad. And it obviously is some of that, but sometimes it's anger. Sometimes grief looks like guilt. And so whatever you're experiencing, whether it's a loss or anticipating the loss of something, you may feel really conflicted that your feelings go from really intense at times and overwhelming to they subside. I like to visualize grief as the waves that come in when you're on the beach in the ocean. Now, beach visiting is usually a happy thing, but I think if you look at the tide and how it comes in, that's how grief can feel. It can overcome you, and sometimes the waves are different, and they look different. So be a little expansive about the complexities of what grief is.
So when we talk about the, sort of the expectation and then that it doesn't rise to it, do you think that it's possible in this sort of further, figuring out what grief is and maybe what it isn't? Can we have grief just about a day? Like, I woke up today and really thought it would be this, and now it's at the end of the day, and I have all sorts of really intense feelings just about how that particular day went. Can that be grief, or does it need to be sort of a longer duration of loss?
I definitely think that what you may be asking has a lot to do with sadness. And I think sadness is oftentimes a situation where the surface feeling isn't obvious. So it comes in other forms. And if we go below that, it's sadness. And a lot of times we want to avoid those feelings. We want to avoid the uncomfortable feelings. Of course, we all want to feel happy and joyful. But when we wake up, like you said in that question, with this feeling of foreboding, or you feel a heaviness or whatever, it could be that you're having that experience because there's a bigger grieving experience happening in your life. And below that might be sadness. So I would just invite listeners to ask themselves, what's below this? I just did a post on social media actually about the idea of asking yourself on the hour, if you're like me and I push away feelings sometimes, what am I feeling? And that is one of the most courageous questions I can ask myself, because I don't always want to acknowledge how I'm feeling. And grief is definitely one of those feelings. Or like you were just mentioning, you wake up and you're just like, wait, this is not going the way I thought it would be today. Asking yourself what those feelings are and just noticing it is a really helpful tool in navigating.
So now that we've sort of expanded then the definition of grief, I think it's fair to say that on some level, or in some situations, each of us encounter grief, whether it is the loss of a loved one, an unmet expectation as we traveled through the COVID pandemic time, a job loss, a marital breakup, a relational breakup. Any of those things can cause us to have grief. So then we speak about our feelings and we go, I'm grieving, but that doesn't seem to give me the light at the end of the tunnel that I want. That just helps me know, oh, okay, I'm like everyone else, and this is grief.
And if we're going to say from the onset that grief is complex and it comes in waves and it is a varied set of emotions, then I always like to throw a good acronym in so that we can figure out how to navigate that, because those are feelings that come and go and are complex. So I would say grief is G in grief is grief. R is don't play the what if game, the regret. So what are the regrets? Sometimes when we're grieving a lot of where we put emotion and energy is playing the what if game of what happened. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't really help us move forward. I like to think of emotions scare us and we tighten up or we numb because we don't want to feel them. But really, if we breathe and feel the emotion, it washes over us like a wave. It's when we tense up and we refuse to feel it that we get stuck. And so the what if doesn't help. On that is don't compare yourself. You're an individual. So whatever your experience with grief is, it may not look like somebody else's. And so oftentimes, once again, we get stuck either in the what if or we don't like our individual way of how grief is showing up. I've talked on the show about the death of my sister. And when her suicide had happened, and I think it was probably a good year and a half after the fact, I remember one day just losing it. And a friend of mine, I was on the phone with her, and I just said, and this isn't grief. It's not grief. Do not tell me it's grief. It is not grief. And she's like, okay, it's not grief. It was totally grief, right? But I didn't want it to be that because in my mind, I even had a judgment of how I should be navigating it. And so I think that brings us to E, to have empathy, whether it's for yourself or someone else that you care for, because they're going to maybe experience things very different. Even within a family, all of our family members handled Meg's death in a different way and at different times and at different levels. So if you're feeling that emotion is a struggle right now, someone close to you that is experiencing the same loss in the family isn't feeling the same thing.
And then F, I was going to say, don't forget the F.
Well, I wanted to be empathetic with you if you wanted to say anything back about any of that. But F is about feelings. And like we've already talked about, let them flow. They're not forever. Feelings are not forever. And so whether it's grief that we're talking about or any of the other emotions that come up as human beings, it's the suppressing of them and the fighting and the clenching of our jaws to not feel it. And I think the fear is that if we feel it, it's going to take over us. And we are more resilient than we realize, but grief is a process. And I'm going to say that I have new things I grieve about Meg. She's been gone 7 years. And so sometimes I also think we need to have empathy that it's not a one and a done. It's not within a time limit. The specialist or the expert that gave the grief paranoid or pyramid of like, these are the stages of grief, he never meant it to be a linear experience. It wasn't like you did this stage of grief and then you moved to the next stage of grief and then you moved to the next stage of grief. That's a misnomer that I think has been kind of detrimental. It was just, these are all the ways in which grief can show up in different stages, and they can have different experiences at different times for us.
We're talking with Ganel-Lyn Condie about navigating grief, and I really love the acronym. I love, first of all, that you always bring an acronym whenever you come on the Lisa Show. But second of all, that it helps us sort of remember, and so as I go back through it, like I think about just, the G being grief, and then the R being regret, and then the I being, that it's individual, that you shouldn't compare yourself to others. Those seems like the three hardest parts, right? We throw ourselves into the grief, and then it is, if I only would have spent more time with the person who passed, if I only would have, worked harder at my marriage, if I only would have whatever that thing is that we're grieving, and then looking at ourselves compared to other people and being like, well, Ganel-Lyn is sure getting through this quicker. What's wrong with me? I don't think we do very well about the E and the F in your acronym. I think we send it in the G, R, and I, and it can be really hard to get out of.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting to feel like we're not maybe moving forward as fast as we want. And I would just say, that is where you get to look at your life and say, okay, this many months later, do I need some additional support? Because there may be a time where you realize that you're not functioning and you're not able to take care of the things that are important in your life. And it may be time to reach out for some professional support or support groups. There are great resources out there for grief support, and a ton of them that are online. So you don't even need to get in the car or get a babysitter. I know there's great podcasts that deal with these issues. And so I would say give yourself time to process your grief, but as you're navigating it, realize that whatever looks like movement forward, it's not helpful to look at your neighbor and say, well, this is how they're moving, because no one person is experiencing anything the same. And I know for me, when I have grieved certain things, whether it's job loss or the death of someone that I love, it brings up other issues. I mean, grief is really generous that way. It can start to trigger all these other things that you're like, this has nothing to do with it. Why is this now coming to the surface? And it's because grief has this magic key that opens the door to sometimes other feelings. So I would invite listeners to consider, if you find yourself 6 months, a year later, and there's certain things not happening, basic self-care, showing up for your job, doing the things that you value, even if they're hard, but you're doing them, I would say permission to get some support and allow an expert or a support group or someone trained to really help you through those stages or those processes that are coming up.
Something that just dawns on me as you sort of talk about that support, and you, of course, you started with saying, some professional counseling, and we think of, therapists, psychologists, psychotherapists, those sort of folks. But you also said support groups, and I wonder, do we use those as to the advantage that they are? Meaning, I think that, popular media has sort of made those a little bit of a joke, like, I'm Richie and I'm a widower or whatever the thing would be. And that's sort of the joke within sitcoms and things like that. But that support groups really can be a different solution where maybe therapy, you're not ready for it, or that's not a thing that works for you. It's a different sort of avenue of finding your way through really any problem, but as it pertains to our topic about grief.
Yeah, and I think what you're also thinking of is the great film of Finding Nemo, where they're in support groups to not eat other fish, right?
Yeah,
and so yeah. I think that's what you were struggling to try to bring to memory is, right? Like there's this perception of what a support group, and maybe that's not your jam. Maybe you're not feeling like that's going to be the support for me. I do know specifically there are widows groups that widows and widowers can come to and support each other in a different way on a social level, because you obviously lose some of that social connection that you need. Mm-hmm. And I do think that may be something better for you. Or maybe you're worried about your children. I just spoke at a grief camp for kids that have lost someone to grief. And it's one of my favorite speaking events to do. I've done it now 2 summers in a row. And I had an interesting conversation with one of the girls when I was done. And it's teenage through college generally, right? And mm-hmm. so those kids don't want to sit every week maybe in a meeting, but they know once a year they get to go to a camp where the whole week is just permission to process grief and loss. But one of the girls came up to me, she goes, I don't really fit here. And I said, why? She says, well, my dad died when I was a little kid, and a lot of the people here are processing grief and loss that has just happened. And for me, it was long ago, and I don't even have memories. And I gave her full permission that she gets to grieve as long as she wants. And what an example it was to me that she was like, I don't know if it's okay. And I gave her full permission. So maybe for you, it's not a support group, but maybe you need something that's just a social experience where other people, it's okay to have those feelings when conversations come up. So, and then, like I said, podcasts are just you maybe running on the trail and you're listening to a conversation around grief that gives words to what you're experiencing.
When we look at grief in a different way and realize that it's not like, if we scuff our knee, we put a Band-Aid on it, and the Band-Aid, protects our skin, so then it scabs. The scab allows skin underneath to be able to grow, and then we're able to be healed, where grief can be sort of a process or you mentioned with the death of your sister by suicide 7 years ago, I would imagine that there is still continual grieving that comes from that, but that it's not that I guess that I'm trying to think of the way that I want to say this, but that it's still
not as raw.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think one of the things that's helpful as we're talking about grief and navigating through that process is that I didn't realize how many new things I would miss to share with her. So 7 years later, when my son is now living in Hawaii having a really unique experience, I miss not being able to have a conversation with her about that, or my daughter's first date, or things like that. So it's not the same rawness where I feel like there was just this fog where I couldn't really think beyond the grief. And I think that's where, when we're more expansive about how we define grief, we realize that your new normal starts to be, okay, that person maybe isn't here to share this with me, or you're grieving your health because you've lost some of your abilities to do the things. Then it's about adaptability and it's about resiliency. But I also think, especially when it's individuals that we have lost, acknowledging that, you know, for me, every time we decorate the Christmas tree, my sister had no spouse or children when she died. So I have her Christmas ornaments. And every Christmas, I kind of know there's going to be a moment. Now, some Christmases, the last 7, I've had different feelings. Sometimes I just feel all the joy of my memories with her and the little soccer picture that's on an ornament, and that feeling comes up. And then there's other times where I'll hear a song in the car when I'm driving, and I'm a complete disaster. And so I would just say, get expansive about what we allow for ourselves. That's self-compassion, right? It's not always going to look a certain way. And journaling is super helpful because it's not dependent on someone else sitting and listening. But I don't think you can replace another human being that is willing to hold space for you. And you may find 10 years from now that you think, oh, I went through all the layers, I've done all the therapy, I've done all the support groups. Why am I struggling and stuck? And to me, the gift, if you can say a gift of grief, is that it forces us to kind of look at what we value, what we prioritize, and it also may be forcing us to deal with some of our own mental health needs and issues. Like after Meg died, I knew I had to get some attention for myself on some things that I had been avoiding. So I think to answer your question on that, it's not as raw maybe. It doesn't feel as trauma-based in everything you're thinking and feeling. But it then goes into another phase where we can be sometimes avoiding, or we can assume it's all done and then it pops up again. And that to me is totally normal and actually healthy.
A great conversation about how we can navigate grief. Been visiting with Ganel-Lyn Condie, author and motivational speaker who works to help people find joy in their lives. If you want to find some of her books and connect with her, hop on to Ganel-Lyn.com. Thanks for being on the show.
Coming up, we're discussing 3 steps for creating a calmer home. Thanks for listening to The Lisa Show. A study done by the Journal of Child Development found that yelling at your children can have the same impact on them as physical punishment. Now, this study found that children who were frequently yelled at had similar levels of stress, anxiety, and depression as children who were physically punished for acting out.
But, as we probably know, it can be hard sometimes. Yeah. You know, you've had that bad day at work. Maybe you're stressed. Maybe money stress, or the house. It wasn't how you left it. What are those things? And your kids have that magic ability to hit all your buttons. You know that situation. So what can we do to stay calm when your kid is screaming at you?
Parenting expert Laura Lynn Knight, a former elementary school teacher and certified positive discipline educator, is here to have this conversation with us and teach us 3 specific steps to help you stop yelling at your kids. Welcome, Laura Lynn.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
What damage does yelling do to a child?
The study you quoted said it perfectly. You know, when we yell at our children, we really create a disconnection between us and our child. And our child needs to feel safe in our home. That's where their real safe place is. That's where their brain is growing, they're thriving. They're able to then, go out and have hiccups in the world, but come home to safety. So it's really important for their social and emotional well-being to have consistency and calm at home. But you hit it right on the head, because it's also really, really hard sometimes to be calm at home because for some reason our kids do know how to push all of our buttons.
Well, and also they don't have the emotional intelligence right from the get-go to be able to express their needs. And I'm sure that, I mean, there's justification that all parents, use. We all do it, in our head. When you are dealing with parents and trying to sort of shift that paradigm, right, for them, what are the common factors that you have found that parents just sort of lose it?
I find that when parents feel that they're being unheard from their child, that's when they often lose it. When they say it for the 10th time, so perhaps they start out calm, but by the 10th time of saying, go brush your teeth, you're kind of have had it. And especially, if you've been at work all day and you're just getting home to your kids and you put dinner on the table, and then it's nighttime or it's the morning and they're trying to get kids out the door. Those seem to be the times when most of the parents that I work with really feel like they're just at capacity and they want to be heard and they want to be heard now. Yeah. And yelling is effective in the short term, right? It actually produces the result that we want. But as we know, and in the research you quoted, it doesn't work long term, and that's where we have to find other tools.
So we promised these 3 steps, and I'd love to just jump right into it for helping you stay calm and not yell with your kids. What are they?
Yeah, so the first step is the awareness that you no longer want to yell. I mean, that's important. And then the parents themselves learning how to regulate their own emotions. And I like to think of it as I'm acting as the prefrontal cortex of the brain for my child. So the prefrontal cortex is our rational decision-making part of our brain. It's in the upper part of our brain. And children don't develop their prefrontal cortex until they're about 25 years old, which is a long time for us to help them. So we have to act like their prefrontal cortex, which means we need tools. I'm also a mindfulness and meditation teacher. That's a huge practice for me and a lot of the parents I work with. So we need the tools, right, of how do I stay regulated in those moments where I feel like I'm just going to lose it and my prefrontal cortex is not going to function properly. And that's when I like to integrate another tool, which is a pause poster. I make this with my child, with both of my children. I sit down with them when I'm in a calm time, and we just make a list of what are some of the things we can do when we're feeling really overwhelmed, when we're having really big feelings. Go outside, take deep breaths, run water on our hands, blow bubbles. My daughter likes to put a stuffed animal on her belly and then watch it go up and down with her breath, like we give the stuffy a little ride on her belly. So just creative ways, and then modeling, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I'm going to go over to my poster. I'm going to pick one of my tools, and as we regulate, it shows our child how to regulate, and their nervous system will calm down. And we can avoid that power struggle, the fight, the yell.
If you're just joining in the conversation, we're talking with Laura Lynn Knight about 3 steps to help us stop yelling at our kids. And it's an interesting road that we walk as far as this goes, because as soon as we say something like to stop yelling at our kids, I think there's a thing within us that go, oh yeah, I probably do yell too much. And now to learn that it, is the equivalent in some way to, actual abuse, almost equated to that. Then we go, oh no, I know I really need to not do this. And so we almost shame ourselves before we even get started. Stop yelling at our kids. And we kind of enshrouded in all this. What kind of advice do you have for those that are saying, yeah, you know what? I do yell, but also I need to give myself some grace so that I can start yelling less?
Absolutely. We have to give ourselves self-compassion. I think that's really such an important point, that we all do this. we wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't something that was happening, because we get overwhelmed, and parenting is a really hard job. I was an elementary school teacher for many, many years. I had 25 kids in my class always, and it was far easier than raising 2 children.
Yeah. I hear you.
And so, with my own too, I too have yelled, and I felt the remorse of yelling. And I remember yelling at my son. He was 3 years old. He was going through that 3 major phase that we hear about. And I just was getting so mad at him. And I had this realization of, I can't act like this anymore. Like, there has to be a better way. And that's where my process started around, okay, what are the tools? And we were just talking about, what tools do I learn first so that I can pause? And that first step in kind of our 3 steps of promoting less yelling in the home. So the first step being the pause poster, creating a space where I'm pausing before I'm reacting. And then the second one is really having connection with the child. So creating the opportunity to say, I hear you're really upset. I see that we're in a power struggle. Acknowledging and validating feelings, offering a hug or asking for a hug. It's so interesting. Sometimes my children, if I say, can I give you a hug? They'll say no. But if I say, would you give me a hug? They will.
Interesting.
It's just a little flip, where they feel like they have more authority, like, oh, yes, I will offer that hug. So as we connect with them, it really invites listening and cooperation. And what so many parents find is that then whatever the issue was, it's been immediately diffused. Your child is much more willing now to cooperate.
It's an interesting idea when we're talking about not yelling at your kids, but it's also contributing to an environment of calm and peace. And I'm wondering when we might have these ideas of what we think our home is like, and it might be very different than the reality. What is your idea of a calm and a peaceful environment where, you are aware of your emotions and you're regulating them and pressing that pause button and creating that space? What does that really look like?
It can look so different depending on the home, but my vision of a calm home is that it doesn't have to look perfectly. If you walked into my house right now, physically, it's messy. I just made lunches for the kids, and there's laundry piled in the corner that I need to get to later. But the internal environment is very safe. And when one of my children have a problem, they know that they can come to me or to their dad, that we'll talk it through. We validate their feelings. They're heard. And there's also a lot of consistency and routine. So we know we've taken time for training. We know what it's going to look like in the morning, how we get ready for school. We're very clear about our bedtime routine and how we get ready in the evening. And that all gives a feeling of calm and safety within the home. And I find that it's really helpful as I practice this process and my kids get older and older. Right now they're 6 and 8. It's just so much more mellow,
Yeah.
It's really nice.
I want to make sure that I've got the 3 steps right.
Yes. We haven't talked about the third one.
Yeah. That's what I thought. So I wanted to make sure.
Yes.
Can you reiterate 1 and 2 and then take us to the third?
Yes. So step number 1 is the parent is able to regulate their own emotions. And we equated that to acting like the prefrontal cortex for the child. And the second step is that the parent has a connected relationship with the child, and they incorporate, special time with their child. Their child feels seen and heard. So connection is key. And the last step in creating a calm home is that the parent is authoritative instead of authoritarian. Authoritarian parenting is kind of like, you live under my house and you're going to follow my rules and you're going to do what I say. And we've seen a lot of rebellion in kids as they get older. And it's also not permissive. Permissive parenting is kind of do what you want, go to bed whenever, eat as much candy as you want. So authoritative is kind, but there's clear limits and routine. And we know that children need that kindness, but they also need the firmness, the boundaries, the routine, and without the yelling.
Yeah. This seems, it is a thing that is so hard. I think that with our intentions, it can become easier. But, like we said at the very beginning of this, in that magic way that kids know at the time that you're teetering on the edge, and they just push.
They know what to do.
And they can push and they can push. You mentioned a little bit, and I would like to know maybe a little bit more. You have noticed a change from being intentional in the stopping yelling with your kids and where that was when you maybe were yelling to where you are today?
Oh, I've noticed such a change. And you know what the most amazing thing is that I noticed the change in my children too, where I actually can hear them in the other room and they'll say things like, I'm getting really upset right now, with each other. And one of them, especially my son, because he's older, he's 8-year-old, he'll say, I'm going to take a break, and he'll walk away and he won't engage in the fight with his little sister. Or he uses these tools at school where he's able to have more empathy towards others. He's able to acknowledge his part. There's so many things that come from this kind of work, and it takes a little bit more work up front. I will be honest about that, creating routines, maybe making the pause poster. You're intentional about how you think about it, but the payoff later on is really cool.
This has been a really great discussion, and we really appreciate this conversation on such an important topic. Thank you so much, Laura Lynn.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And I have a few comm cards and the pause poster and tools that are free on my website. So if anyone wants to head over to lauralynneknight.com, you're welcome to download any of those for free just to be helpful to parents.
Oh, thank you so much. Laura Lynn Knight's a parenting expert who's certified positive discipline educator, specializing in helping families create that calmer home environment. And that website, again, is lauralynneknight.com, and it's LauraLinnKnight.com. Coming up next, do you have a nemesis? Who or what is your nemesis? How can you overcome it? That's coming up next. You're listening to The Lisa Show.
Welcome to The Lisa Show with Lisa Valentine Clark and Richie T. Welcome to The Lisa Show.
How often do you read articles that are from a different political perspective than yours? Well, coming up in 20 minutes, we're going to tell you how listening to sides you don't agree with will make you more of an informed citizen.
Do you have a nemesis?
Nemesis.
No. It doesn't necessarily have to be a person. It can be an inanimate object as well.
Oh, well, now that you say that, not with a person, I don't have a nemesis, but there are certain things that I think that maybe I hate.
Yeah. Well,
is that what you mean?
No, that's part of it. I think you could not care for a particular thing, but do you feel like that particular thing doesn't care for you as well?
Yeah, like I don't know if this is what you mean, but I have no sense of direction.
Okay.
This has brought a lot of pain into my life, and it drives me nuts because I don't have that innate sense of, oh yeah, I've driven here 7 times. I know how to get there. I don't. I need to use a map every single time. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it got to the point where one time I remember thinking, well, if my instincts are always wrong, then maybe I should just do opposite of my instincts and then I'll figure it out.
Yes.
And it didn't work either. Yeah. It's just so, and that kind of thing that I don't know, that's sort of a character trait or an ability that I don't have, that sense of like direction and getting places that just drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Is that a nemesis? That's not really a nemesis.
Not really. It's closer. It's closer, I think.
That's all I got.
I have a nemesis, plural.
Oh,
They're
no.
all sort of lumped into the same.
Is it a thing?
Yeah. So it is a gondola and or a tram. Gondolas and or trams have it out for me.
Oh, no. What have they done to you?
Well, so I'll give you an example. So because of various events and things that I'll do, oftentimes they will be at the beautiful top of a mountain as opposed to the bottom, right? People, especially when you have folks come from out of town, they want to show off our great state. And so they're like, hey, let's take a car on a cable to the top of a mountain where everyone can be able to see the beauty and the grandeur that is this particular thing.
Yeah.
And we'll celebrate, and then we'll ride down, and the people who work the particular event, they'll ride down at a different time. So it has become to the point that I know if a gondola or a tram are involved, something will go terribly wrong. And I'll give you many instances because
my mind is racing at all of the things that could go wrong, and they're very serious.
Yeah.
In a gondola.
So let me first say that no, I've never fallen from
I
a
was
gondola.
gonna
Let me knock on some wood.
Whew.
Hang on. There we go.
That makes me nervous.
Like the cable snaps, although that is my fear and will be how I go.
No, stop.
The gondola has it out for me. That will be
You're a gondola on the gondola.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, thank you.
I've been hanging out with you too much.
But if there is something that can go wrong, it will. Here's an example.
Okay.
This is how the gondola first became my nemesis.
Your origin story.
So I'm at this particular place, right? The event ends, and I have to clean up, and I take a little longer than I normally would, right? I get all the equipment and stuff, and I get onto the gondola. Well, I get about halfway down the mountain, and this is in the wintertime, when all of a sudden the gondola just goes like it's being powered down, and I'm there, and it's the winter time, and there's snow on the ground, and gondola's not known for their heating, their heating capacity there, right?
I wouldn't have thought of that.
Wind is blowing, and I'm just sort of dangling on the gondola, and these types of things, they'll stop occasionally because someone has to unload something, and then you get the brr, brr, and then it starts back up again. Well, after about 5 or so minutes, I think, okay, well, clearly they have forgotten that someone is on the gondola.
Hello?
And yeah, exactly. Like you're trying to pry open the little open window and be like, anyone? Had to call the ski resort security. Luckily I had cell phone service, so I was able to get like the 24-hour number, call up. Hi, I'm on your gondola. I'm pretty sure they shut it down. Can we fire it back up and please get me down off the mountain? Are you kidding? No, I'm not kidding. I think I'm about a third of the way up the mountain. If we can just get me down to the bottom lodge, I'd love to be able to get out of here. And then sure enough, about 5 or 10 minutes later,
thank goodness,
and then gets me down. So that would be not a nemesis producing event if it was just that single solitary one.
So it was just the beginning.
Second story.
Oh, no.
That same gondola, supposed to be in an event. I get to the bottom. The event's up at the top.
Sure.
I get there an hour early, right? Because there's a gondola as part of this whole thing. I think, going to get there plenty of time.
Yep, it'll be fine.
Loaded on. It'll be fine. Roll up. I'm walking. I'm about to step over the threshold where they do the thing, and they have the painted footsteps where you stand, especially if you're a smart aleck like myself, and let the gondola sort of sweep you out underneath your feet like they do. And they said, sorry, sir, lightning delay.
What?
Lightning delay. You're going to have to wait inside the building. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I came here pretty early. Well, most of the party is already up at the event, and I'm like, this event needs to take place, and I'm a pivotal, not the most crucial part, but pivotal part of this whole thing. Yeah, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to wait here for the lightning, till the lightning subsides, which is great. They're caring about my safety, right? You don't want
to be stuck in a gondola when there's lightning.
Get struck by lightning, of course not. So I wait, and I wait, and I wait. And finally, I'm trying to figure out ways to be able to play music from down at the base of the mountain to the top and be able to do it. Right as it's about time, the gondola is able to fire up, and I stare down that gondola, and I'm like, oh, you win this time, gondola.
Right.
And I ride up. So now, most recently, different place.
Okay.
This is a tram, not a gondola. I think surely it's just the gondola that's the problem, right? Up at this thing was rainy. We've had a lot of kind of rainstorms in the west, flash floody type rainstorms. Yeah. Well, I get up. I get there plenty of time. Smooth. In fact, that's how it deceived me.
Okay.
Arriving to the summit of the mountain, no problem. Set up. All is well. Event perfect. Great. Time to go. I'm sorry, everybody. We're on a lightning delay for the tram.
Again.
Which I said, okay, that's fine. I had a group of people that were at this particular event. We decided that we would spend the time waiting for the tram to be released from lightning delay as a dance party, which is great. If you're going to have a lightning delay, have a dance party.
Amen.
So the lightning delay, subsides, and everyone else, they're able to get on that next tram. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe if I pack up quick enough, I can be able to join that. Nope, absolutely not. That tram leaves, and I'm stuck at the top. I pack up my stuff. I'm ready. I'm ready to get on the next one because they run regularly, regular intervals.
Ready.
Except for if you're the last tram down off the mountain, you wait for everyone who's at the top of the mountain to come down. Which, depending on what kind of people you're waiting for, it's the food service people. It's also the janitorial staff who have to clean up after the party. And so I'm able to, luckily, get on the tram, load my things on the tram, and wait for it to go down. Now, if you're just joining, why is this guy ranting about trams and or gondolas? Everyone, we have our own nemesis, right?
Yes.
Maybe there are weeds in your garden and they come back. Maybe it's, everyone has that thing that just it gets under their skin, but also seems to be a current theme. I'm on the tram. My stuff's loaded. All of the crew were ready to take that final triumphant descent from the top to the bottom. Close the door. Lightning strike, not to the tram. Hallelujah.
I was going to say.
But whenever there's a lightning strike, you can't run the tram for 10 minutes from the last lightning strike.
Oh.
So you start the clock and you start counting, 10 minutes from the lightning strike. 3 different times. At about 9 minutes and 20 seconds, there was a lightning strike right before we got to that 10-minute mark. And they don't mess around with lightning on tram. Nor should you. So ended up waiting 30 minutes. The tram finally starts to go.
Okay.
And we make our way down to the bottom of the mountain. Halfway down the mountain, we find out that the canyon in which I have to drive out of is closed. Now, mind you, everyone who was able to go on that earlier tram ride was able to get out of the canyon, but my nemesis staring me down as if to weaken me in the knees wouldn't allow me to get down from the peak to the bottom soon enough. So, finally get off the tram, finally unload from the tram, load myself into the car, and just say, all right, if there's a gap, I'm going for it.
Yeah.
Police officer rolls up because he can tell that I'm just anxious to make my way down out of the canyon. I said, you don't understand. It's the tram's fault. He has a little brother, the gondola, and they're out to get me. I'm not sure what's going on. And the guy's just like,
are you okay?
Do you need to breathe into this, sir? We need to make sure you're okay to drive. Oh, yes, I'm fine. I could walk the line, all the things. We're opening the canyon for 3 minutes. So if you can go. So I'm like,
no way.
Fist out the window. To you, tram. This one's to you. And able to get it out. But I'll tell you what, I am convinced trams, gondolas, chairlifts out to get me. If I had a nemesis, it is the something that takes me from the bottom to the top. I'm out.
Might I offer an alternative? It may be the lightning that is your nemesis.
No.
No.
Lightning.
Coming up in 6 minutes, we're going to tell you how social media algorithms can influence your political perspectives. Thank you for listening to The Lisa Show. Thank you for listening to The Lisa Show. Looking to be swallowed by red rock cliffs and the desert this summer? In 20 minutes, we're sharing with you why you should visit Zion National Park this summer. But first, it's time for your Morning Buzz with Richie T.
That's right. It's 3 things that are trending online right now, things that folks are talking about. And this first one, I say it should be LeVar Burton, but apparently somebody by the name of Mike Richards. Yeah, I know what you're asking. Who's Mike Richards? He's an executive producer on Jeopardy. He is apparently in advanced negotiations with Sony to become the permanent host of Jeopardy. I don't know what happened to LeVar Burton. We did a Change.org petition. It seems like it should be LeVar Burton, but apparently the frontrunner is clearly Mike Richards. Do you recognize him? I mean, he's fine. He's no LeVar Burton, but you don't have to take my word for it. Also, there's a great video trending over on YouTube. It's called The Friend That's Overly Hospitable When You're Sleeping at Their House. And if you've ever had that friend that is, in fact, overly hospitable when you come to visit, you know, it gets ridiculous, and these are the kind of videos that I love when they trend online. The guy who's washing your feet and getting you every single cord that you could possibly ever need for your cell phone, etc., etc. It's called The Friend That's Overly Hospitable When You're Sleeping at Their House, and it's trending over on YouTube. And then finally this, if you are a Disney fanatic, you know this already, but for everybody else, there are 3 new types of annual passes that you can get for the Disneyland Resort. The first one only available for California residents, so I'm not even going to tell you about that one. But the second one is the Believe Key. It's $949 a year, 48 blockout dates, most of which are around Thanksgiving and Christmas. The price includes access to both parks. You can also get the Enchant Key, which is $649, or the Imagine Key. The very top one, you know, the prime one, that's $1,399. It's the Dream Key to Disneyland. You can find it all over Disneyland's website. They go on sale the 25th of August, and that is your Morning Buzz.
Think about the last time you worked on something with another person. You know, what was that group project like? You know, life itself is like a team project at some points in your life. You're going to have to work with at least one other person in order to accomplish a shared goal. Seeing life from that angle can put into perspective the importance of learning and mastering the art of teamwork. But it's not easy working with other people, and it's frustrating when your team members don't do their part. So, what are the characteristics of a good teammate? Joining us today is Denise Dudley, professional trainer and author of Work It, here with us to discuss how teamwork really does make the dream work. Welcome, Denise.
Glad to have you and glad to be with you today. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
You bet. I think we throw along this, you know, you got to be a team player, right? Whether we're talking about a family or at a work situation or whatever, be a team player. But when we say that, what is it that we really mean?
Wow. So when we think about team player, and really I was thinking before I was going to talk to you today that teamwork and team playership really works the same way between families and groups at work, because one way or another, what we're doing is we're trying to accomplish a goal. So I like to think about teamwork and being a team player with the end in mind. Like, what is our goal? So there are some times when teams come together for just one project. Like, we're going to put on the best school carnival ever for our kids, or we're going to get together as a team and be a committee and work to change the policy on our city council, or there's like a permanent team, which would be your family. And the goal isn't just a one-shot goal, it's an eternal goal of let's be together, let's love each other, let's be the best possible family, let's support each other. So each type of team really has a goal if you can think of how to define it. And I like to start there and say, well, what kind of a team are you on?
Yeah, because you need to know what the end is before you know what your sort of contribution to it is. So I guess I'm wondering, are there characteristics across the board that every teammate or team member should have?
Absolutely, yes. And we know what those are. Actually, there's a lot of good research on what makes a good team member, and they're not going to be shocking to anybody, but one of them is, of course, reliability. That we would say that our favorite team players, again, this could be at home or at work, are going to be reliable. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it. I do it the way I say I'm going to do it. I do it within the time frame that I said I would do it. So reliability is really one of those things that every team member might want to try to work on. And then there's one that I add to it that is just sort of mine, and it's a little bit of an offshoot from reliability, and it's predictability. I think that predictability in team members, predictability, by the way, in all the people we encounter, is an important characteristic that is often overlooked or at least not spoken about. In other words, I want to believe that when I see you each and every day, that you are going to be the same person. I'm sure you might know this in your life, but have you ever worked with somebody, or maybe it's even someone in your family, where one day they're saying, "Hey, how you doing, Lisa?" The next day they're like, and they're just grunting. And
then you wonder which version of them you're going to get on that day.
Yeah, that actually, for me, is very not only disorienting, but it's kind of dangerous to me. It feels like I want to believe that that person is the person they're representing themselves to be, and that I can rely on them being that person each time I see them. Now, I'm not saying that, we can't each have a day where we're a little bit off, or we're a little bit sad, or we're kind of tired, or we don't feel great.
Of course.
That's not what I'm talking about. It's more people who seem to have wild variations in how they behave when they're around us, which I just don't think is a good idea. So reliability, back to my little list here, being reliable, but also being predictable, I think that makes you a better team player as well, because then I know what I'm going to get every time I see you. Then, of course, from there come good communication skills. And when we think about good communication skills, of course, I need the ability to tell you what I'm doing or how I intend to do it, or to give you a progress report about where I am with the project. But listening, boy, oh boy, listening is at least half, and I always say it's better than half, of any interaction with another person. So important to be a good listener.
Absolutely. I'm thinking my head is spinning about all the applications in a family and at work, can really cross over into the different areas of our lives. And the question I think that on a lot of our minds is, no matter what setting we find ourselves with, we know that people have different sort of work styles and work habits. So how does that factor in when you're trying to work as a team?
Great question. So it kind of leads into another thing, which is the idea, again, at work or at home, the idea of play to your strengths. Think of what your skills are, and think of what the skills are of the people around you. And in either situation, let's just take home, because I know that all your listeners have a home, and maybe not all of your listeners are at work or going to work right now. But even in a home, there's going to be somebody who's the cheerleader, who's the one who's always encouraging. There's going to be the person who's really good at making decisions, and there's going to be the person who loves to divide and organize and analyze and figure out what things need to be done. And so each person in a unit of people probably has some strengths and also probably some weaknesses. It's just how it works. And so the idea of making sure that when we do, I'll say, assign tasks, that we play to the strengths of the person. Now, it doesn't mean that all of us, each of us, might not want to develop new strengths and good characteristics, but at least when we're first assembling our team, and let's go back to a work situation. I have 6 new people I've inherited, and they're my team, and we're going to start out and we're going to do a new project. Well, it's really not a bad thing to find out, just through simple inquiry, what does each person really like doing? What sort of settles into the vibe of the room as people go in, sit down, grab a cup of coffee, start talking. You can, if you're the leader, you can start to figure out, this person's quieter, this person is more active, this person likes to contribute, this person likes to sit back and think and write. And so it's a good idea to look at what you got and then figure out who's going to do what, divide and conquer, as we might say.
So we've been talking about the best case scenarios, about how to be the best kind of teammate. And Denise, you have so much experience as a professional trainer and a business consultant. You've seen this work in action. So now I want to sort of troubleshoot about those. I think that the most common thing when you say teamwork, I always think of that situation where it's like, oh, great, it's a group project at school. I'm going going to end up doing all of the work because I care too much or because I am a little OCD about it or whatever. And everybody else is going to, just whatever or phone it in. What do we do when we have problems of it actually working?
Oh, man. It's so funny you're saying that because I do a lot of different work. I do lots of stuff around the country, but and I'm not just a keynoter or a professional speaker. I also work with so many students. And in particular, I'm out here in California in the same town where Cal Poly is, California Polytechnic University. Mm-hmm. So I'm a mentor and a counselor to a lot of these young people out here who are, and also Cal Poly, by the way, has a motto of learn by doing. So everyone who graduates has a senior project. This is just
and it's your grade, and the stakes are high, and you don't have time to teach people how to be a good teammate.
No, and so truly and quite literally, the question I get more than any other question when I'm working with students is, Denise, I'm on this team, and I'm the only one doing the work. I'm the only one. What am I going to do? And so it's like the most common question of, like, what do I do when everybody else is just messing around, and I'm the one who cares, and I want the good grades? So that's a hard question, and the answer isn't anybody's favorite answer, but it is this, that, you can encourage and you can cheerlead and you can even chide. You can even say, just a minute, everyone, we better get this together. You can do whatever you want. But when it comes down to it, if you don't have control, now if you were literally the boss or the supervisor, then you could do some things that were very serious, like I'm going to simply write you up if you're not doing your team project. But in school, or if it's at home and somebody's not really cleaning their room, or back to the school project example of yours, when it comes down to it, sometimes you actually have to just be the one who says, that's it, I want a good grade, I'm going to have to carry this, and they're all going to ride on my back, and it's not going to be fair, and blah, 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 but I'm going to have to do it anyway. Now, short of that answer, which no one likes, but I do have to share it, short of that, because it's sort of reality, but short of that answer, yes, there's nothing wrong with sitting down with a group of people and saying, you know what, you guys, here's what's happening. I'm carrying the load here. I'm doing all the work. Every single thing that we're producing is coming out of my laptop so I can prove it. And we really need to share this project because that's what's fair. And what's going to happen is that people are going to say, yeah, I know, and I'm really sorry, and I'll do better, and all those things, but they might not.
I've been so busy.
Exactly, I'm so busy, and I have all these other issues, and oh my gosh, my internet isn't strong enough, and you'll get every excuse in the world, and so sometimes you just have to carry the project. But asking for cooperation there's nothing wrong with it, and also actually, saying that, look, people, I really need this kind of help because I can't carry the whole load. Would you be willing to please help me? Sometimes moving from, I don't like this, I want you to share the load, moving from that to requesting help. A lot of times there's a lot of research on all this. I wish we had all day to talk, but a lot of research says that if I walk up to you and I actually say, would you be willing to please help me, that there is a little bit of a trigger because we're human beings and we have compassion. We're playing to that compassionate part. There's a lot of research that says when I truly ask for help, make direct eye contact, do all the things that allow you to, I guess I'll say, enter my world psychologically, that you're more apt to agree to assist me. So truly stopping what's going on and saying, I really, really need help, everybody, might be a better approach and might draw a better answer from people.
Well, and I love that you are really echoing what you said at the beginning of our conversation, that communication, having those good communication skills is only going to make you a better teammate. And so you're really modeling that.
Yeah.
And my mind is spinning of all the applications as a parent, please help me.
Yes, exactly.
Instead of just, keeping it inside, being a martyr, just saying, I have to do everything, communicating and doing that. And knowing that you can be counted on will make it more likely, I think, for it to happen in the future.
I wish we could talk. There's a whole bunch of stuff about like how when we communicate with people, how we might be able to stop people from interrupting us. And because that's just a habit that people have sometimes, which can be very, very frustrating. And the whole thing about interruptions is that, yes, I could go through the whole thing with you right now, but I won't. It's not our topic. But there are all kinds of ways to ask people to stop interrupting us. But the best one, which is the ultimate one, is to actually stop and ask and say, are you willing? Would you be willing to wait before you speak until I've finished what I'm trying to tell you. And a lot of times that's the one that works the best because, again, we've played to the compassionate part of the other person that, oh my gosh, I'm really bugging Lisa every time I interrupt her. I don't mean to do that. And so we get down to the heart of how we could ask someone for assistance or to help us out. And true with our kids, too. Absolutely true. And we have small kids at home, and my boys are now in their 20s. But yes, when they were little bitty kids, the best way that I could interact with them after they had torn everything up 15 times was to say, could you please help me? When I walk into the room and I find this, it's so difficult for me on my day off to have to clean all this up. And then they're like, yeah, Mommy, of course. And so it does work.
Yeah.
It does work. Yeah, yeah.
I want to switch topics just a little bit to make sure that we have time to talk about this because many places have gone remote, and so team dynamics are just super unique at this moment. And I'm wondering what your perception is about not only how remote working has changed that team dynamic, but how we can use what the situation is right now to our advantage.
Wonderful questions. Thank you for those. So yes, of course, team dynamics for all of us. I'm sure for you too at the Lisa Show, and for me with all the people I work with. I have a lot of clients. We're all Zooming, or we're FaceTiming, or we're just on the good old-fashioned telephone, and so there's very little face-to-face contact with people, and we can't have it. And I'm a huge believer in social distancing and mask wearing, and I hope that all of your listeners are as well. And so I believe we're doing what we need to do in order to slow this down and bring ourselves back to normalcy. So, and I don't think it's going to be over really soon. So in terms of how we're interacting with one another at work, and even in extended family situations where you can't have Thanksgiving with all your family members any longer and such. So yes, this is changing things. I am, as a psychologist, which is my background, a little worried in that I think that being isolated is not good for us. We're mammals. That's what we are. We're humans. We're very cool mammals because we can talk and we have opposable thumbs. And aren't we lucky? And we build cities. And
we're pretty great.
Yeah, we're great. We're great mammals, aren't we? We're just great. So anyway, so we're mammals, and we know that we're social. We just know that about human beings. We're not like felines who like to hunt alone. So we're social mammals, and so this whole thing of being isolated and working alone and being alone, I don't think is good for our psyches or our souls or whatever you want to call our essences. And I do worry a little bit about a few things. One of the things I worry about is that if someone were a little bit prone toward liking being isolated, like if you were a little bit withdrawn, let's just say you're introverted, or you're just not really great with working with groups and you'd really rather work alone, and on all those social assessment tools that people give you when you join a company, if it was showing this person prefers to work alone, this person doesn't like groups, well, if you were a little bit moving toward that anyway, this might not be good for you, because all the social skills that you were forced to learn because you went to school and because you worked in a company and because you really did have teammates, all those things after a while can kind of evaporate, and then you can become more hermit-like. And I think that anyone who was sort of on that scale anyway is going to have trouble reintegrating. I think that's an issue that we need to think about when we reintegrate our teams. Anyone who wasn't overly oriented toward teamwork anyway may have a lot of trouble reintegrating. And then those of us who are actually team players and are social and like being social, well, we're just kind of miserable. We're not having a lot of fun right now. It's not like
really
we're liking
hard.
it. Yeah. It's like, this is hard. I want to be with people. And so that's not really very good for us either, because we're every day up against something that doesn't look very inviting. I'm in the same position. I get up in the morning and I walk into my office, which is downstairs from my bedroom. Well, and there's no one in it but my cat. And so it's a little bit like, wow, I don't get to say hi to people and have a cup of coffee with them. And so nobody's really too happy right now about it. And the ones who are happy probably needed to be socialized, and they're not being socialized. So I'm sorry for such a long answer, but the answer is
it's a complicated question, though.
Yeah, well, it is complicated because each of us is experiencing what we see in our own little individual worlds differently. And some of us are saying, this is horrible, get me back. And some of us are saying, this isn't so bad, I hope it lasts forever. So I think that we have to start by saying each person, once we do reintegrate, will have had a very, very different experience, and we might need a very, very different reintegration experience in order to come back into the team fully. I also do think, because I am working with a lot of organizations out here in California, Silicon Valley area stuff, that it's maybe never going to go back the way it did. And what I see right now, because I work with a lot of people, is that the older population of workers, we'll say people 50 and above, are saying, I can't wait to get back to this. I can't wait till we're all in a room together. I can't wait until, I walk in the morning and everybody's at their cubicles and we're all, but when I talk to people who are maybe in between 25 and 35, they're saying, wow, I've just figured out how I can work remotely. I've just figured out how I can do my work every day, but actually be at the beach. So, and of course we know that the 25 to 35-year-olds are going to be running the country very soon because the 50-year-olds will be retiring. So I think that we may, through this COVID situation, have seen a shift in how the future of the work site will look, and I don't know that it will ever go back.
Denise Dudley's a professional trainer, business consultant, and author of Work It, a book for young professionals to take charge of their careers and find meaningful employment. And for more of her tips or her book, you can visit her website at denisemdudley.com. Coming up in about 2 minutes, we're giving you the inside scoop on how to visit Zion National Park this summer. You're listening to The Lisa Show.
All right, it's time for another edition of Lisa's Adventure Club, and this week we travel down to probably one of my favorite national parks in the system. It's Zion National Park. If you're unfamiliar, it's in southern Utah. It's a haven for hikers, climbers, and anyone who loves adventure, and it's also a great place for anyone looking to go on a unique vacation. So here to tell us everything we need to know about enjoying the area is Ashley Rossi. Ashley is the managing editor at Togo RV and Road Trippers, which are two road-based travel apps that help RVers and road trippers plan their perfect trip. She loves Zion National Park, and we are sure to love her. Welcome into the show, Ashley.
Hi, nice to be here.
Now, I did a fair job of describing Zion National Park, but maybe you could take us a little bit further. What can people expect when they go there that maybe they wouldn't get anywhere else?
Yes, well, no, you did a great job. It depends on where you're coming in from. The drive is beautiful from St. George, which is about an hour away, and that's where you really start to see the landscape progress and build into this beautiful canyon. If you're coming from Salt Lake, which I have done, it's about a 4 or 5 hour drive, and that really kind of surprises you. You come up to it and you're like, oh my God, these are these towering rocks, and it's really cool to know that it's been formed over the past almost 250 million years. And it's a bit greener than I think some people expect, especially if you're visiting in the springtime.
Now, what do you think it is that sets Zion National Park apart from maybe other, even Red Rock parks?
Totally. So it's cool to know that there are some of the more famous Red Rock parks like Bryce and Grand Canyon are all a part of the Colorado Plateau. So the bottom layer of Zion is actually the top layer at the Grand Canyon. And at Bryce Canyon, the bottom layer there is the top layer at Zion. So you kind of see this progression if you're visiting the other Red Rock parks, which is really cool. But Zion is a top 5 most visited park. So there's a ton more visitation there than, say, at Arches or Bryce. They see about 4.5 million people outside of the pandemic is normal. And it's really unique in that the main canyon road is really the spotlight of this park. It's only 15 miles, but the park is, over 200 square miles. And you have a mandatory shuttle bus there, which you don't get at a lot of the parks, but you do at some of the other more popular national parks. And it's just incredible for hiking. I don't know of any other national park that has like these really cool slot canyon hikes. There's some, Bureau of Land Management land where you can get something similar in Utah, but that's a bit more unaccessible, and you would want a guide and just have those skills to navigate those places on your own. Whereas Zion, you can, do it on your own, and it's so accessible.
You know, you say, and it's true, one of the top 5 visited parks is Zion National Park, which people hear and go, oh, well, I don't know that I want to go on an adventure with a bunch of people, but there's a way to get off the beaten path and get a little bit of solace.
Totally. So there's actually a separate visitor center. It's about 40 minutes away from the main canyon road called the Kolob Canyon. And there's a few, there's actually a scenic drive there as well. And there's a few, or one really short trail that you can do and get a sense of that area. But that's really great if you want to get that wilderness permit and go out into really kind of the wild part of this park. There is, the Highway 9 that you can do, that Zion to Mount Carmel Tunnel, which is a popular drive. But not everyone does it. It's the cool switchbacks that you can actually take an RV through it, which I find really cool. You just have to get a special permit. But a lot of people don't realize that they can do that drive. It's part of the park. It's spectacular at sunset. And then there's the East Rim area as well, which has the East Mesa Trail, which is one of my favorites. So you actually can take it to Observation Point, which has been closed for some time because of a rock fall, and that's going to be closed for a while. Mm-hmm. But this part lets you get an aerial view of Angel's Landing, which is super cool. So some people actually prefer this to doing the more popular Angel's Landing hike.
And now you mentioned Angel's Landing. That's probably the most popular hike within Zion National Park, maybe contending with the Narrows hike, the top-down Narrows. Are there other hikes that you feel like people come from the world around to go and do?
Yes, those are totally the most popular, and they're obviously popular for a reason. I still would recommend doing them, but you can do it, outside of the times when the park is more crowded, like avoiding school holidays, the summer, and even just like midday, because that shuttle system starts running from 6 a.m. So that parking lot will fill up closer to 8, but you can go just really super early in the morning and get it in without the crowds. But for some other hikes that are in the canyon too, so if you are staying at a campground or the lodge, the Emerald Pools is really nice. There's 3 different varying levels, the lower, middle, and upper. And those are pretty leisurely, and you get to see some cool spring-fed pools. You can't swim in them, but I do love doing those hikes for kind of a rest day, if you will, if you're going in between the more strenuous ones. Mm-hmm. And then you can actually horseback ride right in the canyon too. That's a cool trail as well.
Now, we've talked about some pretty high adventure things. Do you think that Zion National Park is an enjoyable place for those that maybe don't like the super strenuous all-day kind of trips?
Yes. So the first mile of that Narrows hike is a paved path called the Riverside Walk. So that's really accessible, and you get to see the Virgin River, and it's beautiful. So I do recommend that. Zion Lodge, eating at Zion Lodge just in itself, they have a great prickly pear margarita or just prickly pear virgin drink, which is delicious. And then the town of Springdale itself is really cool. There's some shops. The hotels down there have spas and pools, and there's a free shuttle system that can take you along the main strip in Springdale. And then also stargazing. The park is really, or actually just became a international dark sky designation. So the stargazing is awesome.
You mentioned Springdale. It's the town that's just outside of Zion National Park. And as we've focused on these various national parks across the country as part of Lisa's Adventure Club, we always like to highlight delicious things. You mentioned a drink that people could be able to get. Are there other things that when you make the trek to Zion National Park, you're like, you have to go to this place and you have to try this thing?
Yeah, I really like the brewery in the lodge. The lodge has the Red Rock Cafe, so it's just super cool. After a day of hiking, you get to stay in the park and grab lunch or an early dinner. And they have just a beautiful front Noli grass area, and you can sit on the top deck outside and just stare out on the canyon, and that's awesome. And the brewery's right outside the entrance, the pedestrian entrance to the park, and that's a great place to hang out. They have a cool little it's not really a beer garden, but an outside patio area, and you can hang out with your pup there if you bring a pet along. So I just enjoyed it's a small little strip of shops and restaurants, and so you can really, explore anything there and visit everywhere in a few days visit.
And you gave us a pretty good indication, right? Like summertime is always going to be busy at Zion National Park. Anytime there's a federal or school holiday, know that people from all over, but certainly locals will try and make the trek down there. So then, given all that information, when do you think is the best time to go?
So It depends on what you want to do. If you're really set on those, epic hikes, you don't really want to go in winter. It's going to be damp and cold. And summer actually can be a bit risky because of the flash flooding that can happen, and that runs into the fall. So if you do want to do those Angel Landings and the Narrows hike, I would recommend going in the springtime, maybe April. I've been in early March and then late April. And early March, there was still snow, which was really cool because you would see the waterfalls coming down the canyon walls, which there's only a short period of time that the park looks like that. But we weren't able to do those 2 hikes on that trip. So visiting in late April, it was perfect conditions. We didn't have to worry too much about the flash flooding risk. And it was warm enough that we felt comfortable going into the water. So I'd like to say, you got to go more than once, and you have to be patient and flexible with it. Like, I was a little bit disappointed on that first visit that I didn't get to do some of the hikes, but it was awesome, and it just made me want to go back more. So go in the summer and the winter.
We've had the conversation with a lot of folks that we've had in as part of Lisa's Adventure Club, because one of the things that's being expressed is that we are loving our national parks to death. How do you feel like we can combat that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, visiting in some of those off-peak times is best, and also, spreading your tourism dollars across the area, not just spending your money in one place for the whole trip. The national parks are amazing that they make things pretty affordable. Like that, those rates at Zion Lodge are only around $200 for like a cabin when you compare that to some of the crazy prices that get charged at hotels or even glamping spots nearby. But you do want to, spread that money. And in the greater Zion area, there are some really awesome state parks. Snow Canyon is one that comes to mind. That one's amazing. I feel like that should be a national park. And so just, driving around and visiting other areas and spreading your time and your footprint, I think is the best way to combat this. But, it's popular for a reason, and you also have to be patient and adapt to knowing just that it's going to be crowded if these are the things you want to do. But the shuttle system does help. I was actually there when they were doing the reservation system for the shuttle tickets, and I thought that worked really well. It was part of some COVID precautions, and they stopped doing that, I believe, in late May. But I'm wondering if more parks are going to start making that system mandatory or going forward, even outside of the pandemic.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about this because it seems to be your specialty, RV traveling, going to national parks and being in those recreational vehicles. For some people, they hear that and they think, maybe that's not for me or that's a different season of my life. Make that appeal to anyone that has considered it but maybe not tried out the RV travel.
Oh, it's amazing. I love it. It's just, you have total control over your schedule, and you have a bathroom on board. A lot of times at national parks and campgrounds, that's not always the best amenity or option. So just having that attached to you, especially in the pandemic, having everything self-contained has been awesome, and you can have total control over where you're traveling and when. And the campgrounds, especially at the national parks, I mean, there's nothing more scenic. It can be a bit competitive in terms of getting a campsite. So you do want to stay on top of when those booking windows open for which parks you want to go to. But the state parks and boondocking on Bureau of Land Management land is amazing. There's a few areas actually right near Zion that are popular. And just having that freedom and flexibility and being able to work from your RV is awesome.
Ashley Rossi, the managing editor at Togo RV and Road Trippers. Follow along with them on social media at Road Trippers and at Togo_RV. It's another Lisa's Adventure Club special segment here. Don't forget, you can go to BYURadio.org to be able to register to win an annual National Parks Pass. Do it today. We give one away every Friday here on the show, and I promise you that you will not be able to win one of those passes if you do not enter. So go there right now, BYURadio.org. Look for Lisa's Adventure Club and enter to win.
My kids had some of their friends over after a rehearsal, a musical rehearsal.
So many questions already, but please. Having that many kids over after a musical rehearsal, I wonder, are we talking like the entire cast?
Oh, no.
Are we in costume?
No, we're still doing.
Rehearsing?
They had to get COVID tested, so they
come
were
to your house. You are strict
to do the musical without masks. They have to get COVID tested, and when they do, they were like, "We're negative, so we can hang out."
cool.
come to my house.
Mom,
you know?
it's totally cool. We got the rapid test. We're perfectly fine.
A little bit. So, there were like 4 kids over, and they were all sitting around and talking and laughing and eating, and it made me think of my sort of high school experience of doing similar things and having my friends over at my house. My house was the place where we gathered, right, and just like teased each other and laughed, and it was just a fun time. And it made me think that sometimes, I know the expression is the youth is wasted on the young or whatever, but if you could go back in time and hang out with yourself at a certain age, what age would you want to sort of like talk to yourself at? Because I, in that moment, was thinking, oh, I remember when I was a high school sophomore. I wish I could go back and talk to myself at that age and, I don't know, give myself some advice or whatever, and just kind of see if I still had the same sense of humor or a similar one, or I don't know. I just, it's a weird idea, but it would be fun to talk around, the dinner table with your family of that. Of like, what age would you like to go back in time and talk to yourself at?
So what I immediately thought, and this is just so horrible, I thought, I'd like to go and talk to my 8th grade self so that my 8th grade self would have a friend that he could talk to.
Richie. That breaks my heart.
Yeah, but
why is 8th grade the worst?
It was
by the way.
It was the.
Can we all just acknowledge that 8th grade is the worst for everyone?
It was the literal worst, and I'm not kidding. That 8th grade year, I went from one middle school to another middle school, and parents got divorced, and new neighborhood, and just all these things where I just like, if you would have known me, I was just clamoring for like, hey. Does anyone? Maybe I'll be like you. Will you be my friend? Like, I feel like that Dr. Seuss book of Will You Be My Mother? Like, I just was like, anyone? Can I? Maybe if I behave this way and all these different things. It's just such a floundering time. It would actually not be the time that I would go back and talk to myself. Yeah. But that was what immediately came to my mind is who would I talk to? That poor, friendless 8th grade Richie, or technically Rick. At the time.
We have these conversations, on this show, some with, neurologists or social scientists that talk about how when you have like these sorts of vulnerable conversations with other people and talk about how you had a rough year or rough times and how you got through it, that it builds resilience and grit in your kids or the people that you or your friends that you have the conversations with. So I think it's worth having the conversation for that reason. But, oh, man, poor Rick.
I will say this, and so to hopefully dig us out of this terrible story of despair, I
just thought it would be funny, but you took it to a really dark place.
I will be nothing but authentic because I don't feel like it suits us if I say, it's totally fine.
Of course.
But 8th grade, like I said, the scenario of if parents divorced, new school, new neighborhood, new church community, new all these things, and didn't really know what to do, couldn't find my way. And so it demonstrated in some ways long hair was part of it. I went to thrift stores and bought like corduroy 3-piece suits and bell-bottomed pants.
So you didn't make it any easier on yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Because I just felt like, if I can't fit in, I'm going to own that I am the one that is choosing why I can't fit in, right? Like you don't get to pick whether I'm part of it. I'm picking, and I'm opting out of this whole thing. And I can remember very distinctly, this is at the end of the year, and this is the hopes to actually bring some light into this whole thing.
Okay, good. I like that.
There was a teacher, her name escapes me at this present moment, but I can tell you what she taught. She taught keyboarding and home economics. See, back in the day, kids, we had to used to take home economics and keyboarding classes. Anyway. And she was not my teacher. She just was a teacher at the school. And on the last day of my 8th grade year, she stopped me in the hallway. And when a teacher stops you, you immediately think, oh no, what have I done? I'm certainly in trouble for something. And this teacher, this woman, stops me in the hallway and she says, hey, do you have a minute? And I was like, well, teachers, of course. Yep. can't make something up like I don't have a minute. And she said, I just want you to know that in your year here, I have watched you from afar. I don't think I've ever had you in one of my classes, but I want you to know that I have seen you here at this school, and I want you to know that I think that you are going to do amazing things with your life, and I'm excited to have you come about and be able to do those things. And I think that that's exciting. And I know that this year, she didn't know me. Again, I know that this year, I can tell that this year has been hard for you, and I don't know why that is, but I just want you to know that I think that you're an amazing person who will go far in this world.
Wow.
And that has stuck with me probably more than, I would say, 98% of the teachers and the experiences that I've had, because it was someone who didn't know me, who took the moment to say, hey, you know what? I want you to know you have value in this school community, in your life, that there is that potential for you, and took the moment to notice.
Wow. The kind of impact that we can have on each other could never be underestimated, right? So if those, kids are in your house or you see them passing by, don't underestimate maybe saying to them what you might have wished someone had said to you or actually did say to you.
Yeah.
The Lisa Show is a production of BYU Radio. You can find everything you need on the BYU Radio app, where you can listen on demand, or you can also find us on SiriusXM Channel 143. If you like something you heard, you want to hear it again, you can download our podcast wherever you download your podcasts. You got your Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play. Any of them are great. And feel free to share The Lisa Show, a segment that you liked, or an entire show on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. On tomorrow's show, we're going to learn why people need pets. You're listening to The Lisa Show.